Hey there, Marshall here from Limited Resources. We're jumping in another depth check style draft here. So let's take a look at what we've opened. And we've got really two choices here: Oblivion Strike or Jorian Ruin Diver. I mean, I think Oblivion Strike's a better card. I'll just get that right out there right now. But Jorian is pretty powerful and can be pretty fun. Yeah, let's take the Jorian. Let's mix it up a little and see what happens. So here we've got a Zada's Commando, a Grip. We also obviously got past the Baloth Null, which we would have snapped up after taking the what's it called? But yeah, I'll take the Commando here. Might take a Relentless Hunter out of this pack. You know, there's nothing super exciting. A Slip Through Space could be a reasonable card. I guess I'll take the Slip. All right, Boulder Salvo 4th is nice. There's also a Slip that we might wheel here, so I like that. Roiling Waters coming back would be fine as well. Here's another Slip. And a Grip. Slippin' and grippin'. Take the Grip. Ooh, Cyclone Sire right here. I like that a lot. Yeah, that's really nice. A Containment Membrane would be good too, but I like taking the Big Threat here. I'm a huge fan of this card. Ancient Crab, okay. Not a great card, but fine. Crumbling Vestige, but I'm actually going to take a Stalking Drone. This is just a super late Stalking Drone, and we might want to try to diversify out. All right, Containment Membrane here. I like that. I like this Spider, but I'm going to stick on plan and just take the Dwar Isle Avenger here. Overwhelming Denial, sure. Where's the other Slip? So I was hoping to get one of those back. No, that's not it. There it is. Sweet. All right, so now we've got 2 Slips and a Negate as well. So what we'd like to see here, I mean, if we could pick up a Pyromancer Assault, that would be fantastic. But, you know, that's a very specific uncommon, so we don't necessarily expect to just get those. Gladeheart Cavalry. This pack's really god-awful for us. There's just nothing for us. So I'm going to take one of these powerful cards here and see. Like, if you look right now, we're heavy blue, but, you know, there's not... Our red is fine. Like, Jorian's quite good. Boulder Salvo. These are all solid cards, but it's not exactly flowing. And we didn't get any good red card here either. So I've got a Stalking Drone, so I could take the Cavalry to go with that. Or I could move into black, which goes better with blue, and take a Grasp of Darkness. I could even take a Timber Gorge here if we wanted to look at splashing a little bit, but we're giving up some pretty powerful options if we do that. I don't love that idea. I'll take the Gladeheart Cavalry here. All right, here's a Sweep Away in blue. I think that'll be a fine pickup here. I'm not looking to move into green super hard. I'm just looking to hedge a little bit because red feels like it's, you know, not flowing. Well, right as I say that, though, here's a Blinding Drone and a Boulder Salvo. So, no colorless mana sources yet. So if we take the Blinding Drone, then we have to kind of move into that direction. But I'm actually going to do that. I like the Blinding Drone quite a bit. All right, a Sweep Away or a Mauve Kozilek. Take the sweep. Might just want a Seer's Lantern here. I could take an Expedite as well. I could even take a Baloth Pup and just look to splash or forget about these red cards. But I kind of like where these red cards are at, so I'm going to stick with them for now. I'm going to take this Seer's Lantern. Ooh, hello. Got one. All right, well, get out of here, green. Now we're just locked in here and trying our hardest. I'm going to take another Containment Membrane over the Comparative Analysis. I just think it's a better card. Slip Through Space or a 3rd Containment Membrane. It's an interesting decision. Now that we've got the Pyromancer's Assault and the Jorian, those Slip Through Spaces do become quite good, but still, Containment Membrane's just good on its own, and it also works well with what we're doing. And we've got 2 Slips, so yeah, I'll take another Containment Membrane. Spark Mage's Gambit? I could see taking it. I think I'm just going to take the Holdout Settlement here, though. We do have 1 Blinding Drone, and I would like to be able to do something with it. All right, I'll take this Gambit. I could take a Bone Saw, but we all know I'm not doing that. Unity of Purpose or a Maw? Take a Maw. I like that card. Okay, and we got an Expedite as well. That's a pseudo slip through space, so that might just work as well. We got a pretty neat little deck shaping up here. The Blinding Drone was just barely hanging in there, but with triple containment membrane, that's a nice little combo you can set up. We're going to need to find at least one more colorless source, though. Preferably a land, which I don't think we're going to get out of this pack, so they're tough to find in battle for Zendikar. We're going to have to prioritize that if we can. Oh, sweet. Got a nice on-color bomb here. I mean, Akum Hellkite's not one of the best cards in the set, but it's good. Tightening Coils would be good here. Akum Stonewaker we would play. We would not play this Reckless cohort. We'd probably play Rush, though. But yeah, Hellkite, welcome to the team, friend. I like Valakut Invoker a lot. We're a little heavy at 3 right now. I don't think I want to pass a Valakut Invoker for a stupid Incubator Drone, though. That card's fine, but it's not great. So yeah, I'm just going to take this Invoker. Touch of the Void, you say. Otherwise, we're taking a Channeler, which I like, or splashing for a Painful Truths, which we kind of can't really get away with at the moment. All right, I'm just going to keep it simple and take this Touch. Probably want a Ruin Processor here. Boiling Earth can be a good sideboard card, and Spell Shrivel is reasonable, but our top end isn't amazing at the moment, and we are kind of a control deck, so I think I like picking up a Ruin Processor to kind of clean up the mess here. Ooh, lots of good stuff here. Anticipate actually goes pretty well in this deck, but there's no chance I'm passing a Hedron Archive. This is one of the best, I think this is one of the best uncommons flat out in the set, and it also ends up working quite well in a deck like this. I know it doesn't necessarily look like it. I mean, sure, sometimes you just, go Hedron Archive into one of these dummies, and that's great. But the other thing it does is it gives you so much flexibility with your mana that you can quite easily cast 2 spells in a turn. Sometimes it's archive into something, and sometimes it's like you untap and then you get to cast 2 things. So I like that. I guess I'm just going to take this Royal Spout, though. I doubt we'll end up playing it. I'm not going to play a Volcanic Upheaval or a Brilliant Spectrum. So I'll take this Royal Spout. I'll put it on the board for now. Yeah, Wavewing Elemental, sure. If we want another finisher, that's a good one. All right. It's tempting, I think, to maybe take a look at a Sure Strike or a cheap card, but I like this Channeler a lot. I think it just gets us to the big stuff, and like I said, it lets us cast multiple spells in a turn quite easily as well. It's also just good. Plus, we need creatures. We only have 12 somehow. Tightening Coils, very nice. Another good controlling removal spell that's cheap, so we might be able to double up on it. Basically, what we're trying to do here is set up a scenario where if we have Jorian out, we just get value, right? That's easy. But if we have Pyromancer's Assault out, we want to set it up where we can cast a spell and then cast another spell, one of them killing something small, and then the other one being a Tightening Coils or a Containment Membrane to lock down something that we can't kill with a Pyromancer's Assault. That's kind of the idea. Are things getting exiled? Not realistically here, right? No, nothing's good. This exiles. There's a couple of things randomly, but nothing good. So I'm going to take Horribly Awry just as another cheap card. Ooh, a Spell Shrivel? Sure. That exiles. Too bad I just passed the other thing. Yeah, I don't think we're going to end up playing these counter spells anyway, just because we've got a bunch of pseudo removal. I'm probably going to have to cut Blinding Drone, just because maybe not. Actually, maybe now that I look at it, Channeler, Archive, Lantern, and Settlement might be enough. The problem is we don't get to use it in the earlier stages of the game, but it can be really good going late, and it is a cheap spell that we get to play. Yeah, I think we'll probably end up playing it, but man, I'd love to have one more something. Just not worth a pick usually. Ooh, Anticipate, sure. Well, this is an embarrassment of riches. We've got too many cards here, so we're going to be cutting a bunch of spells here and trying to get the balance as close as we can get to good here for our deck. These Surge decks are very tricky to build. All right, let's get down to business. We'll put the Settlement there. We'll group creatures separately. You can see we have 1 billion spells here, way too many. So let's start cutting stuff. We'll cut all of the conditional counter spells. We don't need any of that, and even the unconditional one. I'd rather just play our removal spells as they sit. That can go. Negate can go. I'm sure Anticipate's going to get cut. We still have 6 cards we want to cut, and realistically, I don't think we're cutting any creatures. Like we're only at 13. I think we just want to stick with that. So we need to cut a whole bunch of these. Expedite is much worse than Slip Through Space, so we'll cut that. We could probably get away with cutting Grip of the Royal just because we're not really much of a tempo deck. I mean, it replaces itself, so it doesn't like punish you for it, but no, I don't know. Maybe we do want it. Maybe we want 1 Grip instead of like a Sweep Away or something like that. Because Grip keeps us moving through our deck so that we can find our, powerful enablers here. It's probably fine. Yeah, Anticipate, no way that can stay in. Probably have to cut one of the slips here. Yeah, I think I'm going to cut the Sweep Away as well. I still need to cut another card out of this deck. It could be the Seer's Lantern. That could be the cut here. I mean, I like the idea of Seer's Lanterning out stuff, but we've also got the Hedron Archive. Like, we've got quite a bit of mana here. If we cut the Seer's Lantern, the Blinding Drone does get significantly worse, which is pretty annoying. I could cut 1 Containment Membrane. I mean, I don't love cutting removal, but I think it's fine. We also could just cut the Touch of the Void. But those cards are close in power level, and they're good against different types of creatures. So this is probably a good starting point here. We could slim this thing down a little bit too. Like I said, we could cut like a touch and put in a slip, or, try to make that whole thing happen. But I think this is okay. All right, so settlement in. No Royal Spout. I like favoring islands here. We do have maybe it's actually 8/8 here. We have just enough in the early game, and like we do want extra mountains for Akum Halkai. Okay, take us to the limit here, Pyromancer's Assault and Jorian. All right, in match 1, game 1, I keep a 2-land hand with the Grip of the Royal, end up finding a land almost immediately. My opponent has an aggressive start here, though, with the Baloth Pup, but I find one of the best draws probably in my whole deck with a Zada's Commando there that just blanks the Pup. It actually forces my opponent to use a removal spell on it to get it out of the way. I use a Grip of the Royal just to keep the damage from piling up here, and also to draw me an extra card, and boom, I find Jorian, which is pretty nice here, though I don't have any great blocks. And I'm just going to go ahead and take 3 from the Ranger. Now, a Territorial Baloth is pretty annoying, but I set up a nice turn here where I get to kind of go off with Boulder Salvo to kill the Baloth and even an extra card I attack because I don't plan on blocking this turn at 14 life. My opponent actually puts 2 counters on the Ranger and hits me down to 6, making my no block plan look a little sketchy. Now, this is a big turn here. I can cast a Ruin Processor, or I can go for the double play of drawing a card as well as playing a Mauve Kozilek and killing the Baloth Pup with touch. That's what I decided to go for here, as I think that it would be better to set up the Ruin Processor for the next turn where I can gain the 5 life and have the 7/8 on the battlefield. So I go ahead and make that play. I even get my extra card here, and I decide to leave back 2 different blockers. Unfortunately, when my opponent attacks here, I don't block. I actually just misclick and go through blocks. I mean to chump block with my Maw, and I pay the full price for it. Now, I wasn't actually dead in that scenario, as you can see here, because my opponent needed a removal spell, a burn spell, or a combat trick. But if I just chump block there, then there's not too many things that actually kill me with 5 toughness, and then I get to just play my 7/8 and gain 5 life as well. And unfortunately, that's not how I ended up doing it. So now I got to win back-to-back games to take this first match. For sideboarding, I decide to bring in a couple of Sweep Away, as they're good against combat tricks and big dumb creatures like what my opponent's playing. I take out a Grip of the Royal and one of my weaker creatures with the Jwar Isle Avenger. So here in game 2, we keep I call it a reasonable but unexciting opening hand here with a turn 3 Ancient Crab, looking to just kind of shields up against our opponent. But we actually end up getting pretty lucky here. We rip Jorian off the top, and that really sets us up for some pretty nasty stuff going down the line. We decide to take a turn off here to get Pyromancer's Assault down, and it looks like it's going to pay off for us as our opponent decides to play a Baloth Pup into it. We play Ancient Crab and follow up with the now active and surged out Containment Membrane, which lets us not only take care of one threat, but also kill the pup. My opponent follows up with another pup. Now, we don't actually have a way to cast 2 spells this turn, so we just sit back for now. But boom, we find a Hedron Archive off the top of our deck, which lets us play that into Tightening Coils on the Marasa Ranger, which lets us get triggers, draw a card, and also kill the other Baloth pup. We actually miss a point of damage here. We could have attacked with both and had 1 point of damage. We would have risked Jory and decided not to do it. But this turn gets pretty big as well, as we set up for a Ruin Processor here. We hem and haw a little bit about whether or not to cast it because we want to try to get value from Jorian. But ultimately we decided to just get, well, a little aggressive here and go ahead and cast a Ruin Processor. Now we also have the option of casting Sweep Away here with no really good targets for it though. We decided to just pass the turn back. This leaves us the ability to cast it when it might matter, or if we draw another spell with our Hedron Archive, which boom, we find an Akum Hellkite, play that, and we've got a nice little target here with the Stonewaker. We get that out of the way by just playing a land and pinging it with the dragon, and then attacking for 7, dropping our opponent down to 11. We get pretty aggressive here as well, but realistically, we are just completely going off as we use the Sweep Away combo plus the Zadis Commando that we happen to find on top of our library to get the flyer out of the way. We attack with all 3 creatures here. We're kind of hoping to set up a block where our opponent might put the Grove Rumbler on the crab. That way we can finish off the Grove Rumbler with a mountain. We also could just throw it at our opponent's head here. We have multiple options, but they do actually end up making that block, and we get to kill the Grove Rumbler, leaving a bunch of lethal attackers up. For sideboarding, we decide that we like our setup as it is with both Sweepaways in the main, and we go ahead and head into game 3. So once we're here, you can see that we keep this relatively sketchy opener. We have a turn 2 Zadis Commando, but no blue mana yet with the crab in hand, so nothing too amazing. We do need a little time to let this hand develop. We find an island almost right away, decide to get a little aggressive here and go for a Touch of the Void on the 2/3. The reasoning being that we can't attack or block in with it out there, and it doesn't look like that's going to change for a little while. I don't want to take 6 or 8 damage off of that stupid thing, so I just decide to kill it. Here I attack for 2 damage as my opponent develops their board, misses a land drop. I play Pyromancer's Assault, attack in for another couple of damage, and just play out the crab after drawing a second island. My opponent finally hits land number 4 and plays a Seed Guardian, which is pretty annoying. But we've got some reasonable plays here. We look for a land here and get in for a couple of damage thanks to a slip through space. And we do in fact find the land as well, which can set us up for our Wavewing Elemental the next turn. Opponent plays a Territorial Baloth off of their land, and boom, we find an even better 6-drop to play. Just bigger, so we're going to go ahead and play it out there. No attacks this turn though, and looking to see if my opponent plays a land so they can start attacking with their Territorial Baloth. If they don't, we're in okay shape because we have the crab to block it. They decide to play an Akum Flameseeker, not play a land. And we have an interesting decision here. I think the default line would just be to play the Elemental, but we decided to take a more aggressive stance here. And it ends up being pretty sweet here. We sweep away the 3/4 with Reach, and then that lets us play Tightening Coils on the Baloth, which gives us a free extra 2 damage to kill a creature, and ends up getting us in for a bunch of damage this turn, knocking our opponent all the way down to 7 life. We pass a turn back. We don't play the mountain out of our hand. Yeah, sometimes you want to just jam a bunch of them, but it might kill something relevant, so we decide to keep it in our hand instead. Now, we've got a nice play here where we get to play a mountain, knock our opponent down to 5, and then set up our attacks. We decided to attack with everything because if you look, our opponent actually doesn't have any good blocks here. Even though it seems like they would, they don't. If they let the dragon through, which they end up doing, they go down to 1, and we have the island in our hand to kill them. And just in case that doesn't end up working out, we have a Wavewing Elemental here, which is also a lethal attacker, and our opponent scoops up the match. Match 2, game 1 starts off a little auspiciously. We have to take a mulligan here. But we do end up keeping our 6-card hand and even putting a land on top just so that we have colorless mana source, plus we're able to keep powering through to try to get up to our dragon. Also could potentially give us extra mana. We play the Seer's Lantern here early, and then our plan is just to play this Maw of Kozilek, and we do. That's going to sit there and block against an Alpha Protector, but our opponent has a nice turn 4 play here with Cliffhaven Vampire, but we get lucky once again, and we rip Jorian. But we have kind of an interesting decision here, because we could just slam the dragon here as well. Instead, I decide to attack and just play Jorian out. It's a little bit conservative of a play. I think I would have preferred, looking back, to just play the dragon there. We would have just had the dragon out. I mean, it's not likely to live for super long, given that our opponent has 4 going to 5 cards in hand. But still, I think I prefer it. Our opponent plays a Soothsayer here, and we get to put a Boulder Salvo on top. Now, this is an interesting sequence here. I decide to attack first with my Mav Kozilek, feeling like my attack's pretty free here. And either creature blocks and I'm able to get in. My opponent immediately blocks with a Soothsayer, which I'm like, okay, sure. So I decided just to pay the colorless and trade those off. I was actually quite happy with that exchange. And this lets me set up to play the dragon this turn, which, basically blanks the Cliffhaven Vampire. Unfortunately, Stasis Snare immediately takes care of it, and I fall down to 15 life here. I draw Tightening Coils, though, and I already have Boulder Salvo in my hand. So I decide to make a slightly suboptimal play and just play the Tightening Coils on the 1/4. It doesn't really do anything, but it lets me draw an extra card and still pay the cheap cost on the Boulder Salvo. So I decided to go for it anyway. My opponent, though, has a pretty nice turn, playing 2 creatures the next turn. We use our Seer's Lantern to put Touch of the Void on top, fire it off to kill the Chain Mage, and then even get to play for value. That's right, we get to draw an extra card off of Jorian, and we get to play the Incubator Drone. We find ourselves an Ancient Crab. Another Chain Mage, though, for our opponent means that we're not out of the woods yet. Remember, that Alpha Protector is, in fact, an ally. We pass the turn back to our opponent, who finds themselves a decent little threat here with the 2/2 flying Expedition Raptor, and even goes for a big attack here. We double block here, knowing that the double black mana from our opponent could be Grasp, but that would be their last card, and we'll have to just take our medicine if that's the case. Also, if they decide to use it on there, then that means we get to keep Jorian. So the double block happens, and it is in fact Grasp, and which, you don't necessarily assume that's going to happen. We use our Seer's Lantern, and then don't use it in our upkeep, thinking that we might be able to draw an expensive spell and cast the crab plus that. But I think in retrospect, it may have been better just to use it anyway. That way, I mean, we're still going to get a use out of it in this case, but I think it might have been better. We decided just to play the crab to make sure that we can block. Scry, bottom, find a slip through space, go ahead and fire it off here to draw us a card, and we find a Pyromancer Assault, which is pretty good. It's not going to trigger the Assault itself, but it will trigger Jorian, and we find a really good one with Hedron Archive. That's one of the best draws, I think, in our whole deck, because we can cast it and crack it, and maybe even find a spell if we want to start killing things over there. So the board, tenuously stable. We're taking 2 in the air, plus 2 from the Chain Mage, so we're going to be dead in just a couple of turns here if we don't draw something really amazing. And we end up just drawing a Hedron Archive. I do just peel for the turn, wanting as much mana available as possible. We crack it and find a Ruin Processor plus a Blinding Drone. So this is huge. Getting to play 2 spells this turn means we get to kill the Expedition Raptor with our enchantment and then try to set up for the Ruin Processor the next turn. Remember, we used the Touch of the Void earlier in the game here, so we can actually gain 5 life. And sitting at 4, we needed that. This is absolutely critical. And even then, we're not out of the woods yet, since our opponent can sit here and keep pecking away. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually get a pretty nice little 2-for-1 here. Watch this. So we go Ruin Processor after tapping down the Chain Mage. My opponent, of course, uses it in response. We gain 5 life, and then bang, we get to use Containment Membrane to lock it down. And then we even fire off a couple of extra damage at our opponent's head here after casting the Ruin Processor. Our opponent decides just to sack their Felidar Cub. But now all of a sudden we're the ones who are in the driver's seat, and our opponent does have, once again, the ability to use their Chain Mage. So we're not out of the woods quite yet, but we have a Valakut Invoker. And watch this. I can play it, get in there, drop our opponent down to 9, and then immediately tap all the rest of our mana here to fire off the Invoker and just get rid of that Chain Mage. And we've now stabilized at 5 life. Opponent plays Painful Truce to draw some extra cards, leaving them with 2 cards in their hand, and not much of a board state to deal with our Ruin Processor at the moment. And remember, we've also got the Blinding Drone at the ready. Our opponent uses Complete Disregard to take down our Invoker, which makes a lot of sense. We decided to put this containment membrane on top of our library because we have the blinding drone. Not super exciting, but it will get that, either creature out of the way here. So what we decided to do is tap down the Alpha Protector because it was really likely to chump block here. And with our opponent on 0 cards and with only 1 creature up, we can actually go ahead and force them to chump block. It's pretty great. So we're going to fire it off, drop them down to 5, and this even allows us to attack with more creatures as our opponent scoops up the game. So for sideboarding, I only make one small change here. I bring in another containment membrane and I cut a tightening coils. I feel like those are better against the tapping allies. So for game number 2, we keep a 4-lander here with Jorian and a Hedron Archive. Only 1 island, but so it goes. Nothing much from our opponent or us on the first few turns of the game. We decide just to kick things off with a Seer's Lantern rather than play out a Jorian. Our opponent has a Vampire Envoy. And now we have to decide if we want to play an Incubator Drone or a Jorian. I decided to go for Jorian here, thinking that I might be able to set up drawing a card the next turn. And this kind of does force my opponent to do something. Unfortunately for us, my opponent does exactly do something and plays Stasis Snare to take out Jorian. So, I could have been a little more patient with Jorian there. But the good news is that I have a Wavewing Elemental here, which is going to threaten big chunks of life total if my opponent doesn't have an answer. And the Overseer here, well, that's not an answer for it. So I crack in for 5 damage here, knock my opponent down to 16. And I've got a pretty productive turn here. I get to play Hedron Archive and also throw down the Incubator Drone this turn. So moving things along pretty cleanly here. My opponent does play a Swamp, and that lets them bash in for a huge chunk of damage. 6 hits us. They also gain a life and go back up to 17 and play Visions on our creature, Visions of Brutality. We decide just to go ahead and get aggressive anyway as we're attacking for a massive hit here. 8 damage to our opponent. We get to crack our Archive and even see some other action. We also know that we're going to fire off this containment membrane on the biggest flyer. So we do that as well. We're down to 8, but our opponent's down to 9. They have a Swamp and actually have a pretty nice little sequence here. When they play an Ondu Rising and attack with both creatures, getting them up to 17 and us down to 1, and all of a sudden our plan doesn't look quite as good as it did a minute ago. We need to find an answer for the flyer, and we do. We find a Boulder Salvo right off the top of the deck. Very, very lucky to have found that. I decide just to attack with 1 creature, though it should have been the 2-powered, not the 1-powered creature. I don't actually know why I did that. It's weird watching yourself play. Sometimes you make decisions that don't really make a lot of sense. In the meantime, I get to play a Rune Processor and surge out Boulder Salvo to stay alive at 1 life. There was no exiled card, so we don't get to gain the 5 here. But we look to be stable. Our opponent attacks, and I decide just to go ahead and block and force the issue here. It looks like it was Flaying Tendrils that ends up finishing off our Ruin Processor, but they lose their creature and we're attacking for 2. No action here for us though, and I decide just to go ahead and scry on my opponent's end step. I did draw a card for the turn. I should have scried there too, but I don't. I play the Pyromancer Assault now and even get to surge out my 3/3 flyer and get my opponent down to 10, but I'm still at a very precarious life total here. But interestingly, I actually miss lethal, at least in one way, where I put that island on the bottom of my deck with the scry. But if you look at the board and you remember what all the cards do exactly, you'll remember that Visions of Brutality is a triggered ability. And what that means is that if my opponent's dead before that trigger resolves, then I never take the damage. Now, I don't remember that in the game. I do know that. I just did not think about it at the time, and I'd kind of discounted it. Being at 1 life probably made me very wary of my life total. And so I didn't do it at the time, but I could have put that on top, attacked for 5 with the Wavewing Elemental, and then another 5 with my 3/3 flyer, my 2/3 on the ground. Now, my opponent could get me though. If they had any removal spells in their hand, they could just kill one of my creatures, take 7 damage, and then I would die to the trigger. But maybe it's something that was worth it, and I didn't consider it, so I ended up putting the island on the bottom. So that leads us to the next turn where I put a crab on the bottom during my upkeep. but I find a containment membrane with no relevant targets. I attack for 5, put my opponent to 5. They find a Felidar Cub just a little bit too late here as I scry once again, and I put a land at the bottom once again, but I find a 4-drop to cast. I combine that with surging out the containment membrane. I just put it on the Felidar Cub just to get the trigger on it, and basically that just gets that thing out of the way and clears the way for a lethal attack with my other 2 creatures. All right, so we take a look at our opening hand here for the 3rd match, and we're up against an unknown opponent, and we have to sort out if we should keep. Now, this is only a 2-lander, and I've heard people say that they will ship back all 2-land hands. This is nonsense, and to help show you why, we need to call in the hypergeometric calculator. I know it sounds fake, but it's real, and it can help you figure out your percentages in spots like this. So the first thing you do, though, is to look at your hand and figure out what it actually does, even if you hit your 3rd land on time. Sometimes your hand is dead even if you do hit, and those are usually mulligans. In this case, we have a good 2-drop, so we're likely keeping either way. But if we do hit our 3rd land by turn 3, what does our hand do? Well, it has 2 castable removal spells plus a creature, which definitely meets the criteria. But it leaves us with the super important question of how often do we hit that 3rd land on time? Take a guess just off the top of your head. The answer? 85%. That's a very high chance, and as a poker player, I'll tell you that I would take that every time. As a visual, for those who hate numbers, how dare you, let's look at the rest of our deck so we can actually see the outs. So take a look here. These are our lands, which are our good draws, and here's our non-lands, which are not good draws. But there's also more 2-drops or less that we could at least cast if we were to draw them instead of lands, so we'll count those in the good enough draws category. If we include all lands and castable spells, then our percent jumps to 91%. Remember, it's not as simple as dividing 15 by 33 since we get 3 tries at it on the draw, and with each one removing a card from the card pool, thus raising our percentage of hitting when we miss. To recap, on the draw, with 17 lands in your deck and 2 in your hand, you are about 85% to hit your 3rd land on time. If your hand actually does relevant things with that 3 mana, it's probably a keep. Just for the record, if you're on the play, the percent falls to 71% to hit that 3rd land, so you'd better be certain you have a lot of action. And also, of course, keep in mind that the more you know about what your opponent is trying to do, the more you can use that to inform your decision. So it's not unlikely that your decision might be different in games 2 and 3 than it would for game 1. Now, this is game 1 for us, so we keep. Our opponent kicks things off with a mountain, which is also our turn 1 play. We draw one of our better cards, but unfortunately it costs 6 mana as our opponent leads off aggressively with a Forerunner of Slaughter. We've got the really nice answer here with a 2/1 first strike. But unfortunately, it immediately dies, and we can see that our opponent is looking to be aggressive. We decide to lock down their Forerunner with one of our containment membranes, and then our opponent follows up with an Eldrazi Aggressor, and we actually have an interesting decision here on our turn. Now, one rule of thumb that you'll hear us talk about on the podcast, and that I certainly normally do in my draft videos, is that you want to save your really good removal for the creatures that are big problems for you. And that means, generally speaking, you don't want to use your removal on a card like an Eldrazi Aggressor, which isn't even a very good card at all. It's very easy to block and interact with in general. But when you look at the scenario we have here, we have a pretty dominant late game lined up, but unfortunately we're going to miss our 4th land drop here, and our option is do nothing. Or we can use our other containment membrane to lock down the aggressor and not take 2, 4, maybe 6 damage from the thing until we find at least our 4th mana source. So that's what we decided to do, and we look pretty stable at 15 life, facing no threats, but here's a Sky Scour that hits us in the head, and it doesn't stop there either. We brick again on lands, and now our opponent finds a 3-drop here, a Dominator Drone, gives it haste and attacks with it. And things are not looking good here for the home team if we drop down to 7 life, but we do find a Grip of the Royal. And we have a decision whether to try to save more damage by casting on our opponent's turn, or whether trying to cast it right now, still save some damage, but get that card and hit that land drop right now is more important. We decide that getting it done right now is more important. So we lock down the 3/2 Dominator Drone and draw a card and do in fact hit. So we play our land and pass the turn back, but unfortunately our opponent's able to keep the pressure rolling. Now with the Skitter Skin that eventually gets haste, thanks to the Forerunner of Slaughter, We do draw a land and play one last spell here. Our opponent kind of tips their hand a little bit. They could just attack with everything, but they actually show us one last card. We decide just to concede so that we don't have to show them any of the cards from our hand. For sideboarding, I decide to take out a Grip of the Royal for one sweep away. I just like that a little bit better as a response to these haste creatures and hope that it gives me a better chance to win. Our opener in game 2 is not very good. It's a 3-lander with a Hedron Archive. We've got our Dragon, and we've even got a Tightening Coils, which we can't currently cast. Holdout Settlement only is going to make mana if we find a cheap creature. We decide to keep it. I think it's maybe on the mulligan side looking back at it now. We do get lucky here and hit Azada's Commando, which is just a very good card against this opponent in general and also opens up our Holdout Settlement. We also just find an island here. And right off the bat, we have an interesting decision. Do we use Tightening Coils or do we not? We decide not to, as it's usually better to leverage your creatures that are good at blocking rather than using your bigger removal spells. What if our opponent down the line here plays something big that our Zada's Commando can't block, right? We've already seen a bunch of cards like that. If we use it now on the Forerunner of Slaughter, that means that we don't get to use it then. So we decide to leverage our Zada's Commando as a blocker here, leave it up, and keep Tightening Coils in our hand. So we pass the turn back to our opponent, who plays their third land and finds a Titan's Presence to take down the Commando, unfortunately, which does clear the way for an attack with the Forerunner of Slaughter. Now, this does lead us to an interesting decision on our turn. We decide to play Hedron Archive rather than play the Tightening Coils, because that can set up a really nice turn. The next turn with the Akum Hellkite, our opponent has a Flare Drone, gives it haste, and knocks us down to 11 damage with the attack. But we do follow up here with the Akum Hellkite, and now we have a decision to make. Which one of these would we like to kill? We decided the Forerunner of Slaughter actually is the one that is capable of more damage, as my opponent could easily play the Skitter Skin that we've already seen revealed. If they hit a land drop, give it haste and attack, and we won't have a really great block for it. So we take out the Forerunner and leave back the Flare Drone. Yes, we will block if we are attacked. Our opponent, in fact, finds a removal spell with Boulder Salvo and knocks us down to 8 life, and things are starting to get a little out of control for us. Even though our turn's pretty productive here, we get to play our Seer's Lantern as well as a Kozilek's Channeler before passing back. And once again, it looks like we've stabilized the board, at least temporarily. Our opponent plays their land for the turn, plays the Skitter Skin, knocks us down to 7 with the triggered ability from the Flare Drone, and passes a turn back. We decide just to immediately crack our Hedron Archive and keep up maximum mana, and it's not bad. We find a Ruin Processor and a Blinding Drone. We also use a Tightening Coils to take down the Skitter Skin, effectively rendering it a dead card as it can't block anyway, and then of course play our Flare Drone out, leaving back our 4/4 Channeler on the blocks before passing back. Now our opponent's got 2 cards left in their hand. One of them, unfortunately for us, knocks us down to 5 life, which is Cinder Hellion. Our opponent interestingly attacks with the Skitter Skin here, and that gives us a funny situation, because do we block it? It's a free block. The creature is going to die. We decide not to. The card that I come up with is Dread Defiler, actually. What if my opponent has a Dread Defiler down the line? We're at 5 life, and that could be bad to have a Skitter Skin in the yard, so I decide not to block and take 0. Go ahead and use my Seer's Lantern here to start setting up our plays, and this is a huge one for us. Ruin Processor, the biggest thing on the board. With us at 5 life and now at our opponent top decking, our life is falling down to 4, and the Flare Drone is starting to become the most important thing on the board here. We find a Slip Through Space, put it on top of our library, draw an extra card off of it, though we don't actually plan on attacking here. We decide to do nothing for the turn because we're going to have to just lean on our Ruin Processor as a blocker. Unfortunately, our opponent immediately finds an Eldrazi Devastator now, and things are once again not looking good as our opponent's really just keeping the heat on us and has us all the way down to 3 here. Once again, we let them go to attacks and then put a Maw of Kozilek on top of the library there, tap down the Devastator so that we can use the Containment Membrane and even get to play out the Maw of Kozilek this same turn. Once again, we're going to pass the turn back, and our opponent finds another top deck. This time it's Remorseless Punishment, and things don't look good for us. Though if you work it out here, you can actually find that we're not dead. It's kind of an interesting position, and I'm not going to say that we're in a good position. We've been fighting and scrapping this whole game, but watch what we can do here. We can use our Blinding Drone to tap down a lethal threat. Now, by the way, our opponent does think the game's over, but little do they know it is not yet. As we tap down one of the big attackers with our blinding drone. And then we have to go and we have to sacrifice 2 creatures. We don't have a choice, so we decide to sacrifice, well, the blinding drone, which is not what we wanted to do, but we have to. And of course the Maw Kozilek leaving us with our 2 biggest blockers back. And we start aggressively going with Seer's Lantern here. And we do find another blocker. We have to find something to get in the way right now to not lose this game. And once again, our opponent finds another huge top deck. This time another 5-drop with the Translator. But we find a good one ourselves. Valakut Invoker, we put that on top and then play it. And this will let us have an answer for the Flare Drone. Now our opponent flirts with the idea of attacking with everything here. This would force a chump block with the Invoker, but also leave our opponent's board pretty decimated here, including losing the Flare Drone. And they ultimately decide wiser and pass the turn back to us. But this does let us untap. We even get lucky and find a Jory in here, which is a nice pickup. But we decide that number 1 priority is just to get rid of Flare Drone here. So we do that and pass a turn back. Our opponent finds another 5-drop with the Kozilek's Channeler here. It's getting pretty annoying how much action our opponents found. We go bottom, upkeep, bottom, find ourselves a Wavewing Elemental, play that out, and now all of a sudden we've got a threat that we can actually use. We decide just to draw our card for the turn because we don't mind whether it's a land or not. We want to keep mana up to play both Jorian and be able to activate the Valakut Invoker. And our opponent's down to 15 now, and we're looking to close this game out as soon as possible. So we dome our opponent on end step. We find a Pyromancer Assault, which doesn't look super great here, but we do still have pressure, and we are still able to apply pressure to our opponent in the air and even attack on the ground this time with the Ruin Processor. The thinking here is that our opponent actually has to block this Ruin Processor or they're dead. And so we get to pick some creature to kill, or maybe they'll even just make a mistake and chump block. I've seen that happen quite a few times as well. So we just force the issue and maybe get rid of a creature here, which seems like a reasonable trade-off. Eventually our opponent does in fact block here, and we decide to get rid of the Trample Cinder Hellion, leaving our opponent with extra mana, but we figure with how much mana they have, that's probably okay. On end step here, well, opponent, again, we give them the chance to attack, but they're not going to take that opportunity because we're just barely stabilized here. We're going to use our Seer's Lantern to find a Boulder Salvo, dome our opponent, and we've actually got lethal here. I decide just to attack with the 3/4 flyer, though I could attack with both flyers, which would be an even better attack, especially given what we see now. Randomly, a splashed Ulamog's Nullifier, which actually is going to chump block here and keep my opponent alive for another turn, which, yeah, that's pretty bad for us, giving my opponent an additional draw step when we're at a lowly 2 life and in such a precarious board position is risky to say the least. We decide not to play Boulder Salvo, instead to use our Valakut Invoker, and we take down the game. For sideboarding, we don't make any changes and just go to game 3. Game 3 starts off poorly as we take a mulligan with a hand that doesn't do anything until turn 4, and it doesn't have a whole lot going on. I just don't want to flood out against the aggressive deck here, and we keep a 2-lander, but with some decent spells here to help keep us alive. We even put a Slip Through Space back on top of our library. We're going to fire it off here to try to find, well, just more lands, more action, and we do. We find a mountain, which could set up Jorian for some value. Of course, our opponent has that stupid Forerunner of Slaughter every single time. But the good news is we have an Ancient Crab to get in the way of it this time. And our opponent doesn't do anything this turn, which is really nice. We have a couple of options. We could play out a Seer's Lantern, but I like just getting Jorian out there. If our opponent removes it, hey, so be it. But Jorian, on the battlefield for the untap next turn can be absolutely devastating. As it turns out, our opponent does have Grasp of Darkness here to take down Jorian, but we're at 17 life. We're doing fine. Pass a turn back to our opponent. Plays a land for the turn. Still has that Forerunner of Slaughter active, but our Crab is doing a noble job of holding it off. And yeah, Kozilek's Channeler is the 5-drop of choice for our opponent here. Now we've got a turn where we can do a few different things. I decided to go Seer's Lantern and play out our flyer, as it gives us a double block on the Channeler or a trade. And we are looking to try to stay alive into the late game here, most likely. Our opponent casts yet another 5-drop here, and they're not done yet. They activated immediately Boulder Salvo away our 3/3 flyer, and even go ahead and give it haste for some reason. I think probably just attack with both. It's the same difference. I'm taking 3 damage here in either scenario, and I fall down to 14. I draw my card for the turn, and it is a holdout settlement, unfortunately, but I've got the ability to kill the Forerunner, which I do, and I've got a sweep away here to take 0 damage for the turn. Well, I shouldn't say that. The Cinder Hellion does hit us for 2, and I use my sweep away to go ahead and kill it, and then on our upkeep, I just draw my card for the turn, and I end up hitting a nice little 6-drop here, the Wavewing Elemental. So my opponent replays the Channeler, attacks with both. I go ahead and go for the double block here. I feel like I need to try to get these threats off of the board if I'm going to survive this assault. Unfortunately, I bottom an island, find another island, and it's just my little crab holding back my opponent, who has got us down to 9 life here. I block the 4-powered creature, of course, end up taking 3, but there's a reality hemorrhage to take out my crab. I scry on my upkeep, and I find a nice little 5-drop here with Kozilek's Channeler, so things aren't looking completely dire, but they're not looking good either. Sky Scour for our opponent, attacks with both. I trade off Channeler for Channeler, but fall down to 3 in the process. Can't find anything, but then I do. Here's a removal spell. I'm at 3 life. I can take one from the Sky Scour. My opponent's on 0 cards, so I scry another land at the bottom and actually find a Blinding Drone, and I might be able to get out of this unless my opponent finds a colorless creature. And in fact, it even has haste just to add insult to injury, and we end up losing the draft. Well, that's going to do it for this second episode of Limited Resources Depth Check. Hopefully you learned something. I had a fun time with this deck. I thought it was a really fun one, and I'm pretty glad I didn't take that Oblivion Strike pack one, pick one. This is a lot more fun than that. Keep our eye out for new episodes of these. Of course, you can find everything related to the podcast over on lrcast.com, and I wanted to say special thanks to our patrons, the people who make videos like this possible. You can find more information at patreon.com/limitedresources. We'll see you next time.